Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
The school I work at isn't exactly in the best neighborhood. We get a mix of kids, some who are genuinely trying to better themselves, and others who seem to think the world owes them something. I try to be fair with all of them, but there's one thing I absolutely cannot stand: cheating and lying. Maybe it's because my parents raised me to believe that integrity matters more than grades, or maybe it's because I've seen too many kids think they can coast through life without putting in any real effort. This particular semester, I had a class of juniors for American history. Most of them were decent kids, but there was this group of about 6 students who thought they were smarter than everyone else. They sat in the back corner, always whispering and snickering during lessons. I could tell they weren't paying attention, but I figured they'd learn the hard way when test time came around. The first quiz I gave was on the Revolutionary War. Pretty basic stuff. Multiple choice, 25 questions. I noticed some weird behavior during the quiz, but I wasn't sure what to make of it. Students kept looking at each other's papers, but I thought maybe they were just nervous and looking around. When I graded the quizzes, something was off. The group in the back corner all had nearly identical answers, including the same wrong answers. But when I looked at their papers more closely, I realized they weren't sitting close enough to easily see each other's work during the quiz. That's when it hit me. They were cheating, but in a more organized way than I'd initially thought. The next week, I decided to pay closer attention. About 10 minutes before the quiz on the Civil War, I heard one of them telling another student how much he loved multiple choice quizzes because they made everything so much easier. The other student agreed, saying they were way better than essay questions. The first student laughed and said something about not having time to actually study all this stuff anyway. When I gave them a look, the teacher look that says I can hear you and I know what you're implying, they immediately put on innocent faces. The first student asked what was wrong, claiming they were just talking about how multiple choice was easier to take. His friend backed him up, saying they weren't saying anything wrong. But I saw the smirk on the first student's face. They thought they were being clever. During that quiz, I watched them more carefully. They had a system worked out. One student would finish first, then deliberately show their paper when they walked to turn it in. The others would quickly copy down answers before finishing their own quizzes. It was brazen, and they clearly thought I was too stupid to notice. After grading those quizzes, the same pattern emerged. The cheating group all had suspiciously similar answers, while the students who were actually trying, the ones who asked questions during class and took notes during lectures, had more varied responses that showed actual thinking. I was frustrated, but I knew I had to be smart about this. If I accused them directly, they'd just deny it and claim I was picking on them. I needed proof, or better yet, a way to catch them in the act that they couldn't wriggle out of. That's when I had my brilliant idea. I had written a quiz on westward expansion about 3 years ago that I really liked. It covered all the important topics, and the questions were fair but required actual knowledge to answer correctly. Instead of writing a new quiz, I decided to use this one. But with a twist, I took my original quiz and ran it through ChatGPT with specific instructions. Keep all the same questions in the same order, keep all the same multiple choice options for each question, but create different versions where the correct answers appear in different positions. So if question 1 on version A had the correct answer in choice A, then on version B the correct answer might be choice C, and on version C it might be choice D. The actual content of each choice stayed exactly the same, just the order changed. I spent my entire weekend creating 24 different versions of the same quiz. Then I labeled every single copy Form B so the students would think they all had identical tests. The day of the quiz, I could barely contain my excitement. I handed out the tests randomly, making sure the cheating group got different versions mixed in with their usual seats. When I walked around the room during the quiz, I watched the usual pattern unfold. The first student finished and made their typical show of revealing their paper when they walked to turn it in. I saw the others quickly scribbling down letters before finishing their own tests. Everything was going according to their plan, except this time, their plan was going to backfire spectacularly. When I graded the test that night, I was grinning like a maniac. The students who had actually studied, the ones who paid attention in class and took notes, scored their usual decent grades, ranging from B's to A's. But the cheating group, they were disasters. The student they'd all copied from had randomly guessed on half the questions and gotten a D. The students who copied from him got F's because they'd copied his wrong answers, but their different answer keys made even his few correct answers wrong on their versions. The next day, I handed back the quizzes. The honest students looked at their grades with the usual mix of satisfaction or disappointment, but the cheating group's reactions were priceless. One student looked at his paper in complete confusion, muttering that this couldn't be right because he knew he got these answers right. Another student whispered to him, asking what he got for number 5 because she'd put C, but it was marked wrong. The first student whispered back that he'd put C2 and thought it was really weird. I watched them compare papers discreetly, getting more and more confused. They couldn't figure out why they all had terrible grades when they'd copied from the same person. Even better, they couldn't complain about it because that would mean admitting they'd cheated. One of the girls raised her hand and told me she thought there might be a mistake with the grading because she was pretty sure she got a lot of these questions right. I asked her which questions she thought were graded incorrectly. She hesitated and said she'd studied really hard for this quiz. I told her I was sure she did, but looking at her answers, it seemed like she might have misunderstood some of the material. I offered to let her come to office hours so we could go over what she got wrong. She couldn't say yes because that would reveal she had no idea what any of the answers actually meant. She just shook her head and slumped in her seat. I watched them try to figure out what had gone wrong without being able to discuss it openly. They'd whisper to each other, then catch me looking and pretend to be talking about something else entirely. After class, I heard one of them talking in the hallway to another member of their group. He said something was seriously wrong with that test because they'd all studied the same way and got terrible grades. The other student agreed, saying it was like I was trying to trick them or something. The first student suggested maybe they should complain to the principal because this didn't seem fair. But they never did complain because deep down they knew exactly what had happened. They'd been caught, and there was no way to protest without admitting their guilt. 2 weeks later, when I gave the next quiz, I just used a regular single version test. I watched the cheating group, and they were clearly afraid to use their usual system. They kept looking around nervously, unsure whether this was another trap. Most of them failed that quiz too, but this time it was because they'd never actually learned how to study. They'd been cheating for so long that they had no idea how to prepare for a test legitimately. One of the honest students came up to me after class and asked if she could ask me something about the previous quiz, the one that everyone did so badly on. I told her sure, and asked what about it. She said her friends and she had been talking, and they thought maybe some people were cheating, but then they all failed anyway. She wanted to know if I'd done something special with that test. I just smiled and told her that sometimes dealing with cheaters means letting them cheat themselves into a corner. The student grinned and nodded, clearly understanding what had happened. By the end of the semester, the cheating group had either started actually studying or transferred out of my class. The ones who stayed stopped their organized cheating system, though I suspect they never really learned to study properly. The honest students, meanwhile, continued to do well because they'd been learning the material all along. Their grades stayed consistent, and several of them even improved when they gained confidence. I never told anyone exactly what I'd done with that quiz, but word seemed to spread somehow. The next semester, I noticed that students were much more hesitant to cheat openly in my class. Apparently, my reputation for not tolerating dishonesty had grown. That quiz took me an entire weekend to create 24 different versions, and I had to hand grade every single one instead of using my usual electronic grading system. But seeing the looks of confusion and defeat on those cheaters' faces, totally worth every minute of extra work. A few years back, I finally saved up enough money to buy my dream house. A nice place with a decent-sized backyard where I could install the pool I'd always wanted. My family never had much money when I was growing up, and swimming at the community pool meant dealing with crowds, limited hours, and sometimes sketchy water quality. When I got my first real job after college, I promised myself that one day I'd have my own private pool where I could relax without any hassles. After months of construction and dealing with permits, my pool was finally ready. The whole setup cost me nearly $20,000, which was a huge chunk of my savings. I made sure to do everything right. Proper fencing around the pool area for safety and privacy, security cameras positioned to monitor the property, and clear signage at the front of my driveway that read "Private property, no trespassing." I wasn't trying to be unfriendly, but I'd heard too many stories about liability issues when strangers get hurt on your property. My neighbor lived in the house next door with her sister and 3 teenage kids who visited during summers. We weren't close friends or anything, just a typical neighborly wave when we saw each other. She seemed okay at first, but I started noticing little things that rubbed me wrong. She'd let her kids ride their bikes through my front yard, leave trash that would blow into my property, and once I caught her sister walking through my backyard like it was a public park. I mentioned it politely and she just laughed it off, saying her family was just being friendly. The incident that changed everything happened last summer when I went out of town for a work conference. I was gone for 4 days, staying at a hotel about 3 hours away. The conference was mandatory for my job, and I've been looking forward to the break from routine. On the second day, around 2 in the afternoon, my phone started buzzing with notifications from my security camera app. I opened the app and saw what was happening. There were 4 people in my backyard, 3 kids who looked like they were in their early teens, and 1 adult woman. They were all trying to climb over the fence around my pool area. The woman was actually boosting one of the kids up, helping them get a better grip on the top of the fence. They were struggling because the fence is 6 feet tall and designed specifically to keep people out. What made it even more ridiculous was that they were trying to get to a pool that was completely covered. I always keep a heavy tarp over the pool when I'm not using it, and the only way to remove it is with a control button inside my house. Even if they'd managed to get over the fence, they would have found a covered pool they couldn't even use. I called the police and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me they'd send officers right away and advised me to keep monitoring the cameras. I stayed on the line watching these people continue their attempts to break into my pool area. They didn't even look around nervously or try to hide what they were doing. They acted like they had every right to be there. The police arrived about 15 minutes later and I watched through the cameras when the officers approached the group. From what I could see, the adult woman was doing most of the talking, waving her hands around like she was explaining something important. The officers spent several minutes taking statements and looking at my property signs before eventually leading all 4 people away from my backyard. When I got home 2 days later, I was barely out of my car when my neighbor came walking across her yard toward me. She was angry and started yelling at me about how her sister and kids now had criminal records because of me. I told her that my cameras had caught what happened and reminded her about the no trespassing sign at the front of my house. She argued back that we were neighbors and I should have just let them use the pool since it was hot outside. I explained that I was out of town and nobody had asked for permission. Plus, the pool was covered anyway. She got even angrier and threatened that I'd see her in court when their court date came up. She said she was going to make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was before walking back to her house and slamming her front door so hard it echoed down the street. I spent the rest of that evening reviewing my security footage and taking screenshots of the clearest images showing the trespassing. A few weeks later, I got a court summons. My neighbor's sister had been charged with trespassing, and she was fighting the charges. The court date was set for the following month. On the day of the hearing, I arrived early with printed copies of my security footage, photos of my property signs, and documentation of my pool installation and fencing permits. My neighbor and her sister showed up with the 3 kids, all dressed nicely like they were going to church. When the judge called the case, my neighbor's sister stood up and started her defense. She told the judge it had been an extremely hot summer day and they just wanted to cool down. She claimed that her sister had told her that she and I were good friends and that I wouldn't mind if they used my pool while I was away. She said her sister told her to ignore the sign because neighbors should help each other out. The judge looked confused and asked me if this was accurate. He wanted to know if I was really friends with the defendant's sister. I told him no, that we were barely acquaintances who sometimes waved hello, but that was about it. I explained that I'd never given anyone permission to use my pool, especially not while I was out of town. The judge asked if I had evidence of the trespassing. I handed over my printed screenshots and explained how my security system worked. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the images, which clearly showed the adult and 3 teenagers attempting to climb my fence. The judge pointed out that he could see from the photos that there was a clear private property no trespassing sign visible at the entrance to my driveway. He asked the sister if she had seen this sign. She admitted that yes, she had seen it, but said her sister told her it was okay because they were friends. The judge looked over at my neighbor, who had been sitting quietly until now. He asked her directly if she had told her sister that she had permission to use my pool. My neighbor shifted uncomfortably in her seat and said she thought it would be fine since we were neighbors. The judge pressed her further, asking if she had explicitly told her sister that I had given permission. My neighbor reluctantly admitted that she may have said something like that. The judge reviewed the evidence again and shook his head. He said the evidence was clear, there was obvious signage indicating private property, security footage showing attempted trespassing, and no evidence of any permission being granted. He noted that the fact that my neighbor had told her sister she had permission when she didn't made the situation even worse. He found all 4 of them guilty of trespassing. My neighbor's sister had to pay a fine and do community service, while my neighbor received a larger fine for providing false information that led to the trespassing. The 3 kids got off with warnings since they were minors who were following adult instructions. When we left the courthouse, my neighbor tried one last time to make me feel guilty. She said she hoped I was happy and that I'd ruined her family's reputation over a stupid pool. I told her I was happy that my property rights were respected and suggested that maybe next time she should ask permission before assuming she could use someone else's things. A month later, when I was working in my front yard and overheard my neighbor talking to another neighbor about what happened. She was trying to paint herself as the victim, but the other neighbor cut her off and asked if she really meant that she'd told her sister she could use my pool without asking me first. The other neighbor said she thought it was ridiculous that my neighbor was mad at me for calling the police when they tried to break in. My entitled neighbor hasn't spoken to me since the court date, which honestly has made the neighborhood a much more peaceful place. I still have my security cameras running, and I've never had another trespassing incident. About 6 months ago, I went through a rough breakup. My ex and I had been together for 3 years, living in this cramped apartment downtown. When things fell apart, I found myself needing to get out of the city and clear my head. My therapist suggested getting a pet for companionship, and that's how I ended up adopting my golden retriever from the local shelter. The staff there told me he was about 2 years old and had been surrendered by his previous owners who couldn't keep him anymore. From the moment I saw him, I knew he was perfect. He's got this gentle soul and the most expressive brown eyes you've ever seen. After the breakup, I decided to move to a small coastal town about an hour from the city. I got a remote job doing graphic design, which meant I could work from anywhere with decent internet. The best part about my new place was that it was only a 10-minute walk to the beach. Every morning before starting work, my dog and I would take our routine walk along the shoreline. It became our thing, and honestly, it was helping both of us heal and adjust to our new life. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I woke up around 7 a.m., made my coffee, and grabbed the leash. My dog was already waiting by the door, tail wagging with excitement. The weather was perfect, with a light breeze coming off the ocean and hardly anyone else around. This was exactly why I loved our early morning walks. Just peace and quiet. We were about 15 minutes into our walk when everything went sideways. My dog was doing his usual thing, trotting beside me with his tail wagging, occasionally stopping to sniff interesting smells or watch the seagulls. He's always been friendly with strangers, giving them a polite look and maybe a gentle tail wag if they seemed approachable. Nothing aggressive about him whatsoever. I noticed this woman sitting on a beach towel about 20 feet away from the walking path. She had short blonde hair and was wearing oversized sunglasses despite the early hour. She seemed to be alone, just sitting there with a large beach bag beside her. I didn't think much of it at first. When we walked past, my dog looked in her direction and gave a friendly tail wag, like he does with everyone. That's when she completely lost her mind. She suddenly started yelling at us, demanding that I get my vicious animal away from her. I stopped walking and looked around, confused. There was literally no one else around except us. I asked if she was talking to us since I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She screamed back that my beast was targeting her and that his behavior was clearly aggressive. I stared at her in disbelief. My dog was just standing there, tail still wagging gently, looking between me and her with a confused expression. I tried to explain that he was just being friendly and wasn't doing anything wrong, but she wasn't having it. She insisted that his tail wagging was a clear sign of aggression and that he was provoking her on purpose. At this point, I thought she had to be joking. I actually laughed a little because the whole situation was so ridiculous. I told her she couldn't be serious and explained that he was a golden retriever and that tail wagging meant he was happy and friendly. She got even more angry and told me not to lecture her about dogs because she knew aggression when she saw it. She started getting up from her towel, reaching into her beach bag. I figured she was just packing up to leave, which honestly would have been fine with me. This lady was clearly having some kind of episode. I told her we were just trying to enjoy our morning walk and that we'd keep going. I started to turn away, gently tugging on the leash to get my dog moving again. That's when I heard her rummaging more aggressively in her bag. She yelled that she wasn't going to let me get away with threatening her. Before I could even process what was happening, she pulled out a can of pepper spray and aimed it directly at my dog's face. Time seemed to slow down when I watched her press the trigger. I screamed for her to stop, but it was too late. The spray hit my poor dog right in the eyes and nose. He immediately started yelping and crying, pawing at his face and rolling in the sand. The sound he made was heartbreaking, like nothing I'd ever heard from him before. It was pure confusion and pain. I dropped to my knees beside him, panic setting in. I grabbed my water bottle and started trying to rinse his eyes, but I wasn't sure if I was helping or making it worse. I kept telling him it was okay and that I was there with him. Meanwhile, Karen was standing there like she'd just performed some heroic act. She said that this was what happened when people brought dangerous animals to public spaces and that maybe next time I'd think twice. I was seeing red at this point. My dog was whimpering and shaking, and this psychopath was acting like she'd done something justified. I yelled at her, asking if she was insane and pointing out that my dog had done absolutely nothing to her. I told her she had just assaulted my dog for wagging his tail. She responded that she had protected herself from an obvious threat and that my animal was clearly preparing to attack. The delusion was unreal. Fortunately, a couple who had been jogging on the beach had seen the whole thing happen. They came running over immediately. The woman asked what Karen had done to my poor dog, while her partner said that they had witnessed everything and seen Karen pepper spray the dog for no reason. The female jogger knelt down beside me to help with my dog while her partner confronted Karen. He told her that the dog wasn't doing anything threatening and that they had watched the whole interaction. Karen insisted that we people didn't understand animal behavior and that the dog had been exhibiting clear signs of aggression. The woman announced that she was calling the police right away. When she dialed, I continued trying to help my dog. His eyes were red and watering, and he kept shaking his head. The male jogger offered his water bottle too, and we worked together to flush out much of the pepper spray. Within about 10 minutes, 2 police officers arrived on the beach. The female officer immediately came over to check on my dog, while the male officer started questioning Karen. The first officer asked what had happened. Before I could even start explaining, Karen launched into her delusional version of events. She claimed that I had brought a vicious dog to a public beach and let it threaten innocent people, and that she had to defend herself when it became aggressive. The second officer asked me to tell my side of the story. I explained that we were just walking like we did every morning, that my dog had wagged his tail at her, and that she had claimed that was aggressive behavior before pepper spraying him without any warning or provocation. The joggers immediately backed up my story. The woman told the officer that they had seen the entire thing and that the dog had been completely peaceful, just wagging its tail when Karen went crazy. Her partner confirmed that Karen had been yelling about the dog being aggressive when it was just standing there wagging its tail, and then she had pulled out pepper spray and attacked it. The officers looked at Karen, then at my dog, who was still shaking and had obvious signs of distress from the pepper spray. One officer asked Karen directly if she had pepper sprayed the dog. She replied that she had defended herself against an aggressive animal and that it was her right to protect herself. The other officer pointed out that the dog had just been wagging its tail, which wasn't aggressive behavior. Karen insisted that we people didn't understand dogs and that tail wagging was how they showed dominance before attacking. Even the officers looked at each other like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. The first officer told Karen she was under arrest for animal cruelty. She protested, claiming it was ridiculous and that she was the victim. When they put her in handcuffs, she continued ranting about how everyone was conspiring against her and how she was just protecting herself from my vicious attack dog. The officers took detailed statements from all of us, and the joggers gave their contact information when witnesses. They also took photos of my dog's condition for evidence. One officer advised me to take him to a vet right away to make sure there was no lasting damage from the pepper spray. I thanked the officers and the couple who had helped us. After they left, I carefully loaded my still shaken dog into my car and drove straight to the emergency vet clinic. The vet examined him thoroughly and flushed his eyes with a special solution. She said he would be fine but might have some irritation for a few days. She gave me eye drops to use and instructions for monitoring him. Over the next few weeks, I had to deal with police reports, pressing charges, and court appearances. The case was pretty straightforward given the witness testimony and the absurdity of Karen's claims. She was convicted of animal cruelty and had to pay a fine, perform community service, and cover all of my vet bills. I've been running a small ranch in California for most of my adult life. I started out with big dreams and a brush clearing business using goats back in the day. Those were good years, driving around with my herd, watching them clear overgrown lots and fire breaks for homeowners in the county. The goats loved the work, and I made decent money doing something that felt useful. These days I'm in my 60s and the business is long gone. My back can't handle loading and unloading goats every day, and honestly, the insurance costs got crazy. I kept two of my favorites though, a pair of elderly miniature goats who've earned their retirement. They spend their days wandering my property, keeping the weeds down around the house, and providing entertainment for the neighborhood kids who love to pet them through the fence. Yesterday morning I was having my coffee when an email popped up that made me do a double take. It was from someone I went to high school with. Let's call her Karen since that's exactly what she turned out to be. We're both in our 60s now, but our lives couldn't be more different. While I was building my business from scratch, she inherited millions from her family. They were one of those old California dynasties you read about in history books, the kind with streets named after them. Karen lives overseas most of the time in some fancy villa, but she also owns a massive estate in Malibu. I'm talking about the kind of place with gates and a long driveway and enough land to get lost on. The recent fires had apparently damaged her property, which is why she was back in town. Her email was short and casual, like she was asking me to pick up her mail. She mentioned she was in town dealing with her Malibu place after the fire damage and wondered if I could bring my goats over to munch on the brush on her land. She wrote it like she was doing me a favor, as if letting my goats eat her weeds was some kind of generous offer. That was it. No asking how I was doing or mentioning it had been too long or even hoping I was well. Just a request for free labor disguised as a casual favor between old friends. The woman hadn't contacted me in over a year, and suddenly she needed something. I stared at that email for a good 10 minutes, feeling my blood pressure rise. Did she have any idea what she was asking? Loading two elderly goats into a trailer, driving them 40 minutes to Malibu, setting up temporary fencing, staying there all day to supervise them, then loading them back up at night, and repeating the process for however many days it would take? And all for free, apparently, since there was no mention of payment. I took a deep breath and wrote back a polite response explaining that my goats were pretty old now, and I didn't do brush clearing anymore. I told her the work involved with moving them and supervising them for days was pretty extensive, and I hoped she could find another solution for her property. A reasonable person would have apologized for not realizing what they were asking, or thanked me anyway and maybe suggested getting together while she was in town. But Karen isn't reasonable people. Her response came back within an hour, and she was clearly annoyed. She wanted to know if I knew anyone else who had goats who could do this for her. She really needed to get this brush cleared, she said, like that was somehow my problem to solve. No apology for the assumption. No acknowledgement that she'd basically asked me to work for free. Just irritation that I wouldn't drop everything to help her out, and now she wanted me to find someone else she could impose on. I do know other people with goats. There's a guy about 20 miles south who does brush clearing professionally, and a woman up north who has a small herd. But I'll be damned if I was going to subject either of them to Karen's entitled attitude. I wrote back that I didn't know anyone available for that kind of work. She sent back a curt thanks, and that was it. No suggestion that maybe we could catch up while she was in town or that she'd love to see me after all these years. Just a brief acknowledgement and radio silence. The message was clear. If I wasn't useful to her, she had no interest in maintaining any kind of friendship. But this behavior wasn't new. Karen had pulled this kind of thing before, and much worse. A few years back, our mutual friend was dying of cancer. This woman had been like a sister to me since college. We'd been through everything together. When she got sick, I started planning a trip to see her one last time. Bought the plane tickets, arranged time off work, the whole thing. Then Karen found out our friend was dying and decided she needed to be involved. She flew in from overseas and basically moved into our sick friend's house. This woman and her family were already dealing with treatments and doctor visits and all the emotional weight of a terminal diagnosis. And suddenly, they had Karen camping out in their guest room. Karen acted like she was doing them a favor, like her presence was some kind of gift. She took over their kitchen, monopolized our dying friend's time and energy, and turned every conversation into something about herself. The family was too polite and too overwhelmed to tell her to leave. Our friend's husband called me a week before my planned visit. He sounded exhausted and apologetic when he explained that she was too tired for more visitors right now. Karen had been there every day, and our friend just didn't have the energy for it. He suggested maybe I could come next month instead. I canceled my trip, ate the cost of the plane tickets and hotel. I figured there would be more time, that things would calm down and I'd get my chance to say goodbye. There wasn't more time. My friend died 2 weeks later and I never got to see her. Karen's need to be the center of attention, even during someone else's tragedy, cost me my last chance with one of the most important people in my life. The funeral was even worse. The family had specifically requested that only immediate family members speak during the service. They wanted to keep things simple and personal, but Karen had written herself a 3-page speech because she considered herself family after knowing our friends since high school. When the pastor called for family members to share memories, Karen stood up and started walking toward the front of the church like she owned the place. She was clutching her speech, probably expecting everyone to be moved by her eloquent words about their deep friendship. Our friend's brother had apparently reached his limit. He was a quiet guy, normally the kind who avoided confrontation. But watching Karen try to hijack his sister's funeral was the last straw. He asked her where she thought she was going. She explained that she was going to share some memories because she'd written something really beautiful. He told her this was for family only and to sit down. She protested that she was family because they were so close. He stood up, walked over to where she was standing in the aisle, grabbed her by the arm, and physically dragged her back to her seat. The whole church went dead silent. He told her that she was not family, that she barely knew his sister, and to sit down and shut up. Karen sat down. She didn't say another word for the rest of the service, though I could see her fuming from across the church. After the goat email incident, I started thinking about that pattern. Karen had always been self-centered, even in high school, but money and privilege had made it so much worse. She'd learned that she could get what she wanted by simply expecting it, and most people were too polite or too intimidated to say no. Well, I'm not most people anymore. I've worked too hard and lived too long to waste my time on entitled rich people who think the world owes them favors. A few days later, I was telling my neighbor about the whole thing while we were fixing his fence line. He mentioned that his cousin does brush clearing with goats and runs a professional outfit. I said Karen probably wouldn't want to pay professional rates. He laughed and said he wouldn't send his cousin to work for someone like that anyway. But then he told me something interesting. His cousin had mentioned that there had been a woman calling around trying to get free brush clearing in Malibu. She was offering exposure and the opportunity to work on a beautiful property instead of payment. His cousin said she was a real piece of work. Karen was making the rounds, trying to find someone desperate enough or naive enough to work for free. Good luck with that. A week later, I ran into another old high school classmate at the grocery store. She asked if I'd heard about Karen's Malibu place. When I said no, she filled me in on the details. Apparently, Karen couldn't find anyone to clear her brush for free, so she finally had to hire a professional landscaping company. They quoted her $15,000 for the job. My classmate said Karen had a complete meltdown when they wouldn't negotiate on the price. $15,000. That's what she tried to get me to do for free as a favor between friends. I just finished my sophomore year at college and came home for summer break, excited to catch up with my family. But within hours of being back, I was reminded of something I'd been worrying about for months: my younger sister's hygiene situation. She's always struggled with depression and anxiety, and over the past few years, it's really affected her ability to keep up with basic self-care. The smell is hard to describe, but it's not just regular body odor. It's this distinct, overwhelming scent that fills her entire room and clings to everything she wears. My mom has to use special detergent and wash her clothes separately just to get the smell out. What really worried me was that she was heading to college in the fall. I knew she'd be sharing a dorm room, and I kept thinking about some stranger being cruel to her about something she was already struggling with. So after talking to my mom, who encouraged me to approach it as her sibling rather than leave it to the parents, I decided to have a gentle conversation with her. When my sister greeted me and asked about my last semester, I told her it was good and mentioned I wanted to talk about college stuff since she'd be starting soon. She seemed excited but nervous about it, which was totally normal. I tried to bring up the hygiene topic carefully, explaining that I cared about her and wanted her to have the best experience possible. I mentioned that depression makes self-care tough and that in a small dorm room, things become more noticeable. She asked if I was saying she smelled, and I explained that depression makes everything harder, including taking care of ourselves. I told her that in a dorm setting with a roommate, issues that might not be obvious at home become really apparent. She seemed to understand when I said I just wanted to help her prepare. We talked about strategies like setting phone reminders and keeping easy hygiene products accessible. I thought we'd made real progress. Fast forward to August. I helped her move into her dorm, met her roommate who seemed nice enough, and everything appeared to be going well. Then, about 3 weeks into the semester, I got a frantic call. My sister was crying and told me she needed help. She explained that her roommate was being horrible to her, telling everyone on the floor that she was disgusting and making jokes about her in the group chat. The roommate had even put air fresheners all around their room without asking. I was furious. Yes, my sister had hygiene challenges, but there are respectful ways to handle roommate conflicts. I told her I'd drive up the next day to help her talk to the resident advisor. When I arrived at her dorm, I immediately understood the problem was worse than before. The stress of college had clearly made her depression symptoms worse, and the hygiene issue had escalated significantly. But what I saw when I met her roommate made my blood boil. Her roommate, who I'll call Karen, was everything you'd expect from someone who posts mean things in group chats. When I knocked on the door, she opened it with this disgusted expression and sarcastically asked if I was there to defend my gross sister. I told her I was there to help resolve a roommate conflict like adults, but she insisted there was nothing to resolve. She said my sister needed to shower or find somewhere else to live and that she shouldn't have to deal with this situation. When I asked if she'd tried talking to my sister directly about her concerns, Karen said she shouldn't have to because it was obvious. She complained that all her friends now thought she was weird by association. My sister was sitting on her bed looking miserable. I could see she'd been crying. I told Karen I understood this was difficult for everyone, but making fun of someone in group chats wasn't okay. I explained that my sister was dealing with mental health issues and stress makes it worse. Karen responded that it wasn't her problem and that she paid the same amount to live there. She said she deserved a roommate who knew how to use soap. I pointed out that my sister deserved a roommate who treated her with basic human decency. Karen dismissed this and said she was getting a room transfer anyway because she'd already talked to housing. That's when I had an idea. I'd been doing research about roommate conflicts for a psychology class, and I knew that housing departments take harassment and discrimination seriously, especially when mental health is involved. I suggested that before she transferred, she might want to delete those group chat messages. When she asked why, I explained that what she'd been doing could be considered harassment of a student with a disability. I told her that depression is covered under accommodations policies, and screenshots of her mocking my sister could get her in serious trouble. Karen went pale. She stammered that she wasn't harassing anyone. I asked if she was really sure about that because I had screenshots of the group chat. I mentioned that my sister had shown me everything. The memes Karen made, the comments about her being gross, and the jokes about hazmat suits. I was bluffing about having screenshots, but her reaction told me everything I needed to know. Karen tried to defend herself by saying those were just jokes, but I told her to explain that to the dean's office. I said I was sure they'd love to hear how she thought mocking students with mental health challenges was funny. She panicked and said I couldn't report her because she hadn't done anything wrong. My sister spoke up and said she'd actually already started documenting everything. She'd saved all the messages and written down every comment Karen had made. I was so proud of her in that moment. She'd been standing up for herself more than I realized. I laid out what was going to happen next. Karen would apologize to my sister sincerely, remove any posts or messages about her from social media and group chats, and stop discussing her personal business with other people on the floor. When Karen asked what would happen if she didn't comply, I explained that we'd file a formal harassment complaint with housing and the dean's office. I told her they take this stuff really seriously, especially when it involves mental health discrimination, and it could affect her housing, financial aid, and even her enrollment status. Karen looked like she was about to argue but then seemed to realize I wasn't messing around. She reluctantly agreed and gave a half-hearted apology, saying she didn't mean for it to get this bad. My sister said it wasn't okay, but she accepted the apology. I confirmed that Karen would clean up the social media situation, and she agreed to delete everything. Then I brought up the room transfer she'd mentioned. I said that was probably still the best solution for everyone, but she needed to request it quietly. If anyone asked why, she should say it was a mutual decision due to different lifestyles. No drama, no gossip. Karen just wanted the whole thing to be over and agreed to everything. She did transfer rooms within the week. My sister got a new roommate who was much more understanding, and they actually became good friends. Karen apparently learned to keep her mouth shut about other people's personal business because I never heard about her causing problems for anyone else. My sister used this experience as motivation to work harder on her self-care routine. She started seeing the campus counselor, got some additional support for her depression, and really turned things around. She said that standing up to Karen made her feel stronger and more capable of handling other challenges. Karen, on the other hand, had to explain to all her friends why she suddenly moved rooms and why she was deleting all those posts she'd made. But people started to figure out she'd been bullying her roommate, and her social standing took a pretty big hit. And now we have have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.